Hello, everybody, and welcome to our May 2025 astrology forecast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by our brilliant faculty member, Shu Yap. So, thank you so much for coming back on the show. And how are you doing today?
I'm good, thank you. Looking forward to another big month. It's probably the last of the three big months for the moment of time before we get a little break, I think.
Absolutely. So, before we get into the specifics of each week, Shu, what is your overview for the month of May? Are we going to be able to smell the roses, or are we going to get caught in the thorns?
Yeah, I think March to May has been a big highlight for 2025. We're nearly through it. We're through all the retrogrades. Things are starting to move into, I guess, better positioning in the skies. However, we're not out of it yet. There's still some big planetary shifts that are happening that we've got to live through. But all in all, I think there is an opportunity for these pivots to really start coming through, to be decided upon, and to feel a bit more comfortable with some new change.
It's a great point. It almost got a sense that we're finally getting a sense of moving forward. Of course, we're going to have the Pluto that stations to go retrograde, but all of the planets par Pluto are going to be direct. We might have a sense of moving forward, but I feel like the overview for May is a tale of two halves. The first couple of weeks, where I think we're in this element of still that intense energy that's lingering with some of the connections that we've had, particularly with the Mars and Pluto, and maybe this sense of these power struggles that's been seen both in the collective and in an individual on the individual level. So the first couple of weeks, still the element again of intensity, some of those power struggles, but I feel as we get into the last couple of weeks, some of those energies and intensity might subside somewhat. Let's get into our first week. Shu, what are your thoughts for the first week of May?
In the first week, we have Venus making a conjunction with Neptune, which is the first time Venus will have made that conjunction with Neptune in Aries for, oh, I don't know how long, to 100 and whatever years that I'm just going through a blank. But
Before we were born.
before we were born, Venus is making its first conjunction with Neptune in Aries, which is always a really telltale sign of what Neptune in Aries might bring for the collective, because this is the first personal planet interaction of Venus with this big collective story. So we may start to viscerally feel the Neptune and Aries story in our relationships, for example, in the way we interact with other people, in the things that we value. So if Neptune in Aries represents things like a bit of chaos in the way we go about getting the things that we want, and our drive feeling a little bit lackluster or maybe not very motivated at this stage, then this Venus interaction is going to probably give us some insight as to, like, well, what do we actually value about this change, and how can we see this reflected in the people around us, and what do we actually want to do with it. So I think Venus conjunct Neptune in Aries is going to, on the 2nd of May, is going to start the month off with some big questions, some thoughtful questions around, yeah, what do we desire about these big changes that are happening? What are your
Such
thoughts?
wonderful points. And I think, again, with that Venus Neptune conjunction, for a while now, if we're talking on the collective, the markets have been fairly volatile. So I wonder if this is still going to be the case as we get to Friday, May 2nd, because of course we've got Venus in a detriment, we've got the confusion with Neptune. So this might be a sense. I would certainly stay away from any major purchases at this time. So whatever you buy online, when you actually receive that item, might not be what you expected with that Neptune involved. So I always stay away from any major purchases with Venus, any Venus connection to Neptune. But this
Mm,
might be a good day on a Friday for some form of escapism on the individual level. Now, not the same sort of escapism we might see with Venus conjunct Neptune in Pisces, but in Aries, this might be a time to a form of escapism which involves movement. So if you're in the northern hemisphere and your local pool is opening up, it might be a great time to go for a swim or take a brisk walk around the park or dance, get moving. We've got Mars in
mm.
Leo as well, so this might be a great time if in that form of escapism to get yourselves moving at this time.
Totally. And don't forget Venus is in Aries, so it's in a sign of its detriment, which means that at one level, you could be feeling the desire to travel and go outside of where you live for a little trip away. On another level, maybe it's about challenging yourself to get outside of your comfort zone a little bit as you review these dreams. Maybe you've got to, get that rocket up behind you and make a move on, which might make you feel a bit uncomfortable, but it might be what's needed if you want these dreams to become a reality.
Absolutely. So the big story for the first week of May, we've got Pluto stationing to go retrograde. Shu, what are your thoughts in this moment in time?
Sure. Well, Pluto will station retrograde every year. So usually it's not a huge deal. But the thing with this Pluto stationing retrograde is that it has just finished the last opposition with Mars that it's had 3 times since November 2024. And that storyline, which would have ended at the end of April, was very much around control and power and dominance and the fighting of wills. But Pluto stationing to go back over these points kind of makes me think that, you know what, this story about control and dominance and possibly aggression and forcefulness might not be quite over yet. It might be about recouping yourself or processing a lot of what's happened since November into the psyche and how you feel about that, how you want to move on, and maybe dredging up some difficult thoughts and emotions around that. So I think it's not over. It's probably less external, this force and aggression concept that Mars and Pluto in its opposition has brought on, but it's being more internalized now. And yeah, some hurtful things could come up in that time, but also that opportunity for regeneration and to see how you can find your personal power in the events since November.
Such great points, and I certainly don't think it's over. And we tie in with that Mercury conjunct Chiron, so that element of hurt or hurting words that might come out in the either the collective or an individual level. So again, this for me, this just ties into the first couple of weeks of May being that element of intensity. Anytime a planet stations to go direct or retrograde, it tends to be one of the loudest planets in the sky. So we've got all those Plutonian themes that come around. And I'm so glad you mentioned about the Mars story because we're recording this today on April 23rd. So we're not quite, I don't know what degree Mars is at right now, but we're not quite at that final opposition with Pluto. So as you're watching this, it'd be quite interesting in the next couple of days from this recording whether we see anything in the collective, whether that's extreme violence or any volatility. You put Mars and Pluto together, it can be quite a reactive and potentially destructive combination. So that's going to be quite interesting in the next couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
So as you're listening to this, maybe something has happened in between the time right here. And yeah, going
Yes.
back to tying in what you're saying about the Mercury conjunct Chiron, especially here in the United States on a collective level, maybe this is a sense of people coming out, this continuation of protests against the current administration right now. So I've got a feeling with this Mercury conjunct Chiron, it might be a sense of people protesting against the social safety net and the cuts. I'm thinking of Chiron, I'm thinking of vulnerable people. So whether that's wounded veterans, where you're getting healthcare cut for veterans, or seniors, where they're talking about cutting social security and cutting US aid across the world. I wonder if this might turn into people being vocal about the hurt to the vulnerable people in society. Now, on a more individual level, this might just be a time where you might just have to be careful with your words. Mercury is direct at this point; it's gaining speed, and in cardinal fire in Aries, it's not really a place to hold back. So you might be having arguments with people. The words might be quite hurtful, might be cutting. So that either might be coming from you, or you may be on the receiving end of those hurtful words. So I would just say be mindful of how you speak during this time and think before you speak. And that might be more helpful as Mercury gets into Taurus on May 10th.
Really good advice. Yeah, nothing cuts deeper than that Chiron sort of wound. So That's really great advice.
Okay, the intense first week. Going into week 2, Shu, what are your thoughts?
Well, then we have a intense full moon in Scorpio, which kind of plays on with that whole Pluto Mars theme a little bit, because Pluto is embroiled in this full moon. This full moon is actually going to be occurring at the square 90-degree point of that Mars Pluto opposition from the end of April. So I would imagine that there could be some unexpected outbursts possible at this full moon as you come to realize and reflect on, what's happened and where you are right now. And I guess my advice would be that sometimes cutting ties might be the best thing to nourish yourself emotionally. Like, you don't need to hold on to everything like you have before. Like, just think that, the world is changing, people are changing, everyone is going through this kind of instability period of time. So we can't hold anyone to anything, and nor should you hold yourself to anything either. So reflect on how you can let go of control if it is causing you too much grief, and come up with a new logic. And I think with Pluto and Mercury making a square at the end of this full moon, maybe some of these new kinds of logic might come through for you to deeply contemplate, what your true core needs are. So I think, yeah, lots of intense realizations for this full moon coming up that are inspired or motivated by very deep themes of wounds and suffering and vulnerability that are coming up through this. So hold tight for this one, I think.
Such wonderful advice, you. And I liked what you said about cutting ties if needs be, because this is a time where you might have to have serious conversations with people. And if you're in the stage of life that you may be being holding on to people in your life that aren't serving you or shouldn't be taken with you on the next chapter, maybe this is a good time to have those serious conversations and cut those ties. We've got the Venus picture in there as well in cardinal fire. So I really love that piece of advice. And it really stems from what you were saying before, Shu, about the week 2 not really getting any easier. This is not a light-hearted week like the first week wasn't. Of course, we've got the full moon in Scorpio. We've got the Mercury square Pluto. On the collective level, this Mercury, the full moon in Scorpio, and this Mercury square Pluto could be a sense of, if we do have this continuation with the protests, that we might be talking about truth to power. Now, the only issue here is that we have Mercury and Pluto in fixed signs. So even if people are coming out and speaking their truth to power, I don't think there's going to be any reconciliation, because we're in very stubborn areas where we're fixed and no one's budging. No one's going to move in their conversations. Now, as we filter down into a more individual level with the Mercury square Pluto, again, it just might be a sense of having serious conversations with people, whether that's family, friends, it could be co-workers. So you might be having serious conversations with people, or alternatively, people might be having a serious conversation with you. So again, it might be a time to just, as Shu is saying, is really to think about what you say and to keep an eye out for this period in week 2. Because the problem is, if you let some of those thoughts simmer for those first couple of days in week 2, by the time we get to May 17th, we're going to have that Mercury square Mars. So if you've let these emotions or everything within you simmer, then it might just come out in more fighting words as that Mercury bumps up against Mars. If you need to say something, do it early in the week. Otherwise, later in the week, it might just come out with all guns blazing. And again, those be fighting words might be what happens.
Such an excellent point. Yeah. So this Mercury is essentially going from Pluto to Mars this week, as opposed to last week where the moon went from Pluto to Mars. So we can still see this Pluto Mars story is not over. And yeah, your advice about, how are we going to communicate the tensions that we're feeling inside, that's really going to be a big theme of week 2. You could, yeah, blurt things out and hurt people's feelings. That's like an unskilled way of dealing with this. Or maybe if you can contemplate this enough at the full moon, you may be able to take some action on how you can follow through with some of your approaches that are more tactical, that are kind of meeting your needs independently, as opposed to having to involve other people with your agenda. So yeah, I really like what you're saying about just the trickster Mercury, playing some funny buggers behind the scenes here.
Absolutely. And I think on a mundane level, as we get to that May 17th, we've got the sun. So we could be thinking about leaders at this time, conjunct Uranus. And we're still probably in that orb of Algol, the fixed star. So we might be, as Celeste always says, we might be in a time or revisiting a time where there might be leaders around the world, or a particular leader who is either probably not something as extreme as being beheaded, but in the old sense of talking about Algol, but it could be a sense of a leader either stepping down or someone leading a department that gets kicked off of what they're doing. So it might be quite interesting to see what's coming out in the news around this time of any leaders around the
Yes.
world and what might happen.
Well, we all do remember what happened last time Algol made its presence. There was a particular shooting at the head region.
That's right. It's quite literal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, but yeah,
Wonderful.
otherwise, the Sun Uranus conjunction, the beginning of Uranus cycle, it's a, if anything, it's a refreshing start, or an opportunity for a refreshing, clean the slate. Like, okay, you've had your little cry at the full moon. Let's just clean the slate and move on. And there's a real detachment about Uranus, and I don't really care about what anyone thinks kind of attitude. So try and, put your energy into something new that's going to make you feel more vibrant and inspire you for the next year.
I love that point. If you're needing to have a good cry, the full moon Scorpio is definitely a great time to do it. There's always an abundance of energy around the full moon, and with Scorpio, we've got this inward polarity. So if you just need to maybe purify and get some of that gunk out of your system, having a good cry, I think, is great advice.
Yeah. The moon can be your therapist for that week.
I love it. Okay, so stepping into week three, Shu, what are your thoughts?
Well, the biggest news of week 3 is that Saturn's moving into Aries. This is highly anticipated. You've probably heard a lot of people speak about this, but I guess my take on Saturn in Aries is the one key word, or a couple of keywords that come into my mind, is about preparation and contingency plans. I guess things could go wrong. I mean, Saturn is not happy. What does Saturn represent? It represents our structures and our plans and our routines and the known world. Aries represents things like emergencies and dangers. It's the battlefield. It's the area where we feel a bit chaotic and erratic and volatile. And so thinking of how those two energies combine together, it's kind of like, well, let's think of some backup plans for when things don't go right, when there's accidents, or when things blow up in our faces. Saturn is going to want to really make sure that we have procedures of what to do in case things don't go right. Emergency management, risk mitigation, evacuation plans, that kind of stuff is what I'm thinking with Saturn in Aries. Never mind what's going on in the world, which is what, a big transit like this is actually going to be more targeting these big geopolitical issues. But personally, it's about how are you going to manage yourself in this fast changing world and come up victorious, around it. And as we go into the horoscopes, we'll see where this falls in your personal charts, so we can see where these contingency plans needs to be thought of. But all in all, it's a conflicting energy. It's a time of great tensions. But what are you going to do about it? You're not going to, we've had the sit back and wallow with Neptune moving in there. Now it's like, right, let's be a bit more practical about it. We've had our wallowing. Let's now get to the doing. What
Such
do you think
wonderful,
of Saturn in Aries?
such wonderful points, Shu, about having a contingency plan, because I didn't even think about that, but it makes so much sense. And I'm just thinking about here, particularly in the United States, with the structure of government. We're having a time where there's going to be a dismantling of government agencies like FEMA that goes and helps disaster victims after an event. So you talking about this actually makes me think of, yes, on an individual level, if we're here in the United States and you're an area like I am that's prone to hurricanes and things of that nature, maybe we're going to have to step up on an individual level if government agencies aren't going to be as helpful as they were in the past. So you talking about contingency plans, I'm like, oh, wow, actually, that makes a lot of sense, particularly here for the United States when we're having the dismantling of some of these agencies. I think that's a really great point. And yes, this is certainly the biggest story of week 3, because the last time Saturn was in Aries was between, first went back, I think it was in 1996 to 1998. And actually talking about some of the points you were making, I made some notes here. So some of the notable newsworthy events back in 96 was the arrest of the Unabomber. We had the IRA, which ended its ceasefire and turned back to violence back in the UK. And what was really interesting here is we had, some of you might remember, but we had mad cow disease. Now, Shu, I don't know if you remember that or was in the news stories in Australia. I don't know if that was a worldwide thing, but it makes me think about, particularly here in the United States, with some of the funding cuts for food health inspectors and with the corporations running amok. So what I'm thinking about here, and I'm not just talking about May, because Saturn, when it fully goes into Aries, this is going to be 2.5 years plus time frame. So I would say to people, watch out in these next couple of years with these funding cuts to safety inspections, whether we hear news reports of corporations running amok and being people having food poisoning, salmonella, all of these things in the food supply. So I think part of my advice is if you're able, I might start thinking about growing your own food. If you have the availability to do, just to know where that food is coming from. Because over the next few years, if we have dismantlings of regulations, particularly here in the United States, I think it's going to be very important that we start looking at what food we can grow ourselves. I don't know your thoughts on that,
Yeah,
Shu.
totally. I think what everyone was banging on about during COVID, about all those preppers and like the apocalyptic kind of mindset, I think that's actually all happening more now, except people aren't preparing. Like, I think this is the time if you were going to bring out your prepping kind of self, this is the time to really do that now, like without sort of scaring everyone, because it's really, I've noticed it's now that we really don't have things on the shelves in our supermarkets, for example. And so I like what you said about like taking things into your own hands now. That's the Aries individuation part of it. Doesn't always need to be about wars or battles and conflicts. It's about how can I be self-sufficient and what structures am I bringing in place for that self-sufficiency to happen. And it doesn't have to be all about you. Maybe it's about you teaming up with a really good group of, 5 or 6 friends living locally that can share in the growing. All right, you grow the potatoes, you grow the this, you grow that, and let's all barter and exchange. So it's these kinds of new approaches that I think need to be had. And with all these funding cuts happening to healthcare and whatnot, time to actually look after your health, like from that blood level, perhaps, given it's Aries, like from the level of your blood, what, like the internal vitality of your system. That's what needs to be worked on now, I think. Like,
I really love what you're saying about maybe having a group of friends or that collective sense of work, because it kind of ties into the Pluto picture for the next 20 years of that Aquarian nature of community. So maybe starting your own growing community, certain vegetables, whatever that might be. But I love what you're saying about self-sufficiency. And if you can do that with a number of people in your local community, I think this might be very important moving forward. And again, not to scare everybody, but this might be a good time, as you say, Shu, to start preparing. But Saturn entering Aries aside, I feel like as we go into week 3, apart from Saturn going into its fall, I feel like some of the intense energy lets up just slightly. We're going to have Sun that enters into Gemini, so we're going to add another planet to the air element. And when we get to this stage in week 3, the dominant elements are going to be fire and air. And elementally, those two elements work quite well together because you have the fire that needs the air for the oxygen in order to grow. So I think this might let up with the intensity and it might be more of a harmonious week. Maybe apart from that Saturn, but all in all,
Yes.
certainly better than week 1 and 2 for me. What about you?
Yes, yeah, absolutely agree. Like, don't forget, this is only just a little preview. It's only going to be Saturn in Aries until September before it permanently goes in to Aries in February next year in 2026. But just before Saturn moves into Aries, we actually do have a really lovely Venus Jupiter connection through the moon. And I know this isn't on the slides, but the moon is going to conjunct Venus and then make a next aspect, which will be a sextile to Jupiter. So, what a lovely translation of light that is. And that's really going to put people in a very positive, uniting mindset, with the great change that's coming. So, this change, when it comes, could come at the point where you're in a good place mentally and socially to be able to then say, right, let's do something. Let's band together as a community. Let's work on things together. So, and new opportunities always come from challenges. It's a it's one of those things where there's a need or there's a problem and there's a challenge, but then innovation and opportunity come from that. And I think we have all of those elements this month with Mercury conjunct Uranus, the Venus Jupiter connection with the moon, and then, yeah, Mercury finally moving into Gemini, its own sign. So try and look to the opportunities that are hidden within the drama. And yeah, maybe it might, if anything, just get you more motivated to live a more sovereign life.
I love that expression, leading a more sovereign life. I think that is definitely the advice I'm taking away from you today, Shu. Wonderful. So into week 4, what are your thoughts?
Week 4, we have that new moon in Gemini. And that new moon is actually kind of followed up very shortly with the Sun Mercury conjunction. So I think it ends on a pretty good note in May. And this is, to me, like that big clean slate kind of feeling, that Mercury is in domicile, and Jupiter uh, uh, coming up to that Mercury cazimi as well, which is a really lovely, insightful aspect to have. So I think it will, if anything, give you the opportunity to detach from the past a little bit, be a bit more flexible or impartial about issues that you might have been a bit stubbornly holding on to from the past, and really gain some insights that could help you regenerate and come out of this kind of messy period of 2025. So, use that new moon to take some time out in solitude and contemplate and meditate on new opportunities, new pivots that you can make for this year.
Yeah, wonderful point, Shu. And I think my overview for week 4, it's a very mercurial week. Of course, as you said, we've got Mercury very happy dancing into its home sign. And after spending time in the murky waters of Pisces, traditionally not a great place, I know because I have it natally, and then dancing through the fires of Aries and being more direct and forthright. Here, we're getting a bit more objectivity with the air quality, which we're having with some of the other planets as well. So with the air quality, we're fact finding, we're gathering information, but we're able, with the Mercury in a strong position, able to sift through the facts and make probably better connections than we have been doing. So I think this is a great time to write ideas down for the future, as she was saying before, maybe some contingency plans for the next couple of years. But it's also, I think, with the new moon, I think just highlights all the points you were making before. And this Mercury is going to get supercharged when it gets to the conjunction to the cazimi. So not only is that Mercury going to be powerful, it's going to be on steroids with the cazimi at the heart of the sun. So again, everything mercurial this week. If you've got any plans for the summer coming up or anything that you have to really make a plan for, this is really the week to do that. Or on the mundane individual level, it just could be a great week for catching up with people, chatting away. Mercury and Gemini likes to connect. It's a social time. And maybe it's just a time where you just want to escape and enjoy time with friends.
Absolutely. Or find yourself a good book that really inspires you. All those mercurial things. Yeah.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, Shu, as always, thank you so much for going through the first couple of weeks. Quite an interesting month we have for May. So next we're going to go into all of our rising signs.
Mm-hmm.
So going into our Aries rising friends, Shu, your thoughts?
Well, the big story is really Saturn moving into your first house, which is going to bring a whole heap of motivations, one could say, whether they're forced upon you or whether they're self-directed, around your themes of like your health, your well-being, including your mental well-being. There is that tendency for that Aries archetype to be that kind of fight or flight, running on adrenaline and reacting really quickly to things. And that can take a toll on the nervous system. So maybe Saturn going into the first house is, that might bring some issues or challenges up in that area, but hopefully in the long term, it's going to bring about some good routines and strategies and how you can manage that moving forward. Yeah. Let's see. Anything to add on that?
No,
We've
it's a
got,
great point about Saturn because that's going to be very apparent for Aries rising as it starts making its way through your first house. Now, it's only going to dip its toes in initially, but if you have early degrees of Aries rising, certainly keep an eye out for that Saturn. It can manifest in many different ways. I'd certainly pay attention to Saturn if you are a night chart and seeing what it does if you're early degrees of Aries rising. But any degree of Aries rising, you might feel that shift of Saturn coming to the first. So it can manifest in many different ways. Certainly pay attention and anything to do with, body health. I think the thing that's helpful here is that you have your chart ruler finally out of your fourth house, finally out of Cancer in its fall, and has some dignity as it starts moving through your fifth house. And as Mars goes through your fifth house, it's going to eventually have a nice connection with whatever your ascendant degree is. But the point being here is if that Saturn starts to feel heavy at some point, that Mars is going to be a great outlet if you need to maybe exercise more, maybe get involved in sports. If you are involved, use that Mars for a healthy outlet to have an outlet in a creative way. And yeah, that's going to be a great time to do that, particularly if you include the South Node going through the sixth house. So I think that Mars, particularly being your chart ruler, is going to be helpful in terms of getting off the couch. I don't know. What do you think, Shu?
sure. Yeah, I think also with Mercury making its way through your second house, that's going to activate this Mars Pluto opposition. And you're also going to have this Uranus conjunction there in that second house. So that's what you were saying before, Callum, around being careful with your words and to not sort of shoot at the hip too much, because that's maybe there's, if you've got children, for example, that there could be some potential arguments with children, for example. But if you don't, this is potentially hitting on that area of your ambition and your what you want to do in your life, your creative potential and how you want to do that in the world. And so that can kind of lead to job situations, for example, that this could all play out in. So I would also be watchful for that, given that Mars is involved and it is the ruler of your ascendant. And so that's going to bring that story into a more personal space for you. But by all means, like what you said, that Mars in Leo is a very creative time for you this month to be really engaging in your work. Like what's your life's work and what do you want it to be your life's work? So yeah, definitely take the time to be a little bit playful and spontaneous in that area, and keep that dream alive.
Wonderful point. And if you look at the transiting planets right now for you, Aries rising, we're kind of focused here in the first quadrant of the chart. So I always say this, like I've been doing for months, is which Aries you don't mind doing is you do you. A lot of the preponderance of these planets in the first quadrant speak to what you want out of life, the things that you want to do. It's less concerned with the right hand side of the chart, the western side of the chart, which is more to do with others. So things that you need to get done, just go ahead and crack on with it. I think what's going to be kind of nice, yes, Venus might be in a detriment, but as it's going through your first house, might be a good time to go and treat yourself. Maybe go and do a spa day, some form of activity. Venus rules
Have
your
a
seventh.
makeover.
Have a makeover, exactly. Not Venus rules your seventh house. Maybe you can do this with a partner. So that Venus might be quite nice as it comes through
Yeah,
the
totally. That's a
first.
great point. Yeah, especially when Venus makes that trine to Mars, great time for things like, get a haircut or like go to a sauna or something.
I love that. Haircut's going to be a good one. Cutting of the Mars ruled. I like that. Then of
Dye
course,
your hair red.
I love it. Wonderful. Okay, into our Taurus rising friends. Shu, your thoughts.
Okay, Taurus rising. Well, let's see what we've got is that big full moon, I think, is going to be very angular in your chart and probably causing a lot of deep contemplations. We spoke about that full moon in Scorpio as being that time that it's okay to have a cry if you need to. There's a lot of things that are being dredged up, especially in the area of relationships and partnerships for you. Uh, and that's not just the full moon, it's because of the Pluto making its station as well, at cross angles from, in your career house. But also, we've got that Pluto Mars opposition that's lingering on, that's in that area of career and home as well. And it could all be a little bit too much by the middle of the month for you. So, yeah, take that time to do a bit of wallowing and contemplation about what you can cut ties with. We mentioned before, like sometimes maybe it's cutting ties with your need to control everything that's causing you grief. So maybe just let it go. Challenge yourself to do that because otherwise there could be a lot of potential stressful um, uh, concretizing emotions that you might hold on to that you don't really need to. So that's the big, I feel that's a big story for the Taurians this month.
Wonderful advice, Shu. I think for you, Taurus rising, it's almost a tale of contradictions here because yes, it is your season. However, if you take the larger view of where the planets are located, it's kind of like, yes, you are highlighted in some way with the sun transit in your first house, but we have a bunch of planets going through the 12th, which is including your chart ruler. So, as Shu was saying, I like Shu's idea of if you're needing to let go or to hold back, I would say maybe if you practice any form of meditation, this might be a good time to maybe go off behind the scenes and maybe either meditate or get away from it for a bit, especially as that chart rule is going through your whole sign 12th house. I think that's a great time to do that. And particularly with that Mars as it starts to make its way through your fourth house, anytime a planet goes into an angular house, she was already mentioned the Mars Pluto opposition. Angular houses are very loud. So with that Mars going through the fourth house, on the negative side, there may be some conflict that comes up around their family. So whether that's your own home life, maybe there's arguments going on. Alternatively, this could just be a deal of energy implanted into home projects. So there's always a shadow and a good side of each of these stories we tell. So if that's the side,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you can get your hands dirty and get some home projects done with that Mars in the fourth as well.
Totally.
And
That's how you could process some of these emotions by just
yeah,
getting out and doing. Yeah. Because with all that heavy 12th house energy, the tendency might be to play the victim. The why me, it's always happening to me, that kind of, it can be so easy to get dragged into that mindset when you've got all this stuff going through the 12th house. So the challenge this month is to, just get moving. Um, uh, get moving, especially around the home, and to, like you said, set up some kind of a structure where you can ground yourself, whether it's through meditation or some kind of spiritual practice. That could be your contingency plan.
Wonderful, wonderful point. Did we touch on Saturn dipping into the 12th? Did you mention that, Shu?
Well, yes, in that whole kind of,
Oh, sorry.
the
Yeah.
12th house being loaded. But yes, Saturn, I was kind of mentioning that because Saturn is moving in there. On the positive, you're not going to feel this that externally or in your face. It's more going to be playing out internally in your mindset, that whole Saturn in Aries story. So this is where you need to work out ways in which you can manage yourself. What plans do you have to pull yourself out of the ditch if you need to?
Wonderful advice. And with that Saturn rule in your ninth and 10th houses, maybe keeping an eye as it dips its toes into Aries, any topics that come from those houses. Of course, we're going to have Pluto go retrograde, which, it does a lot, but there might be some themes coming up there. So whether that's maybe, it could be many different themes. It could be power struggles with bosses or your own sense of power. But as that Saturn dips its toes in there, maybe keep an eye out for some of those themes that come up. And I think I've mentioned this quite a few times, but if you're late degrees of Taurus rising, keep watching out for that Uranus. Unexpected.
Totally.
Absolutely. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, into our Gemini rising. Friends, Shu, your thoughts.
Yeah, I feel Gemini risings could get off scotch a little bit this month. Like there's nothing too dramatic happening. There is that new moon in Gemini at the end of the month, which we've kind of identified as a pretty good movement for this month. But I think other than that, there's a lot of 11th house activities happening for Gemini risings, which is about the way what you gain in the world. Maybe it's your plans for the future, your ambitions, your aspirations, your community. Those are the topics that are really going to be um, stimulated this month as you think about, well, what can I do? And maybe and what are my plans for these areas of my life? And maybe those conversations might be coming up for you because of some delays or difficulties happening in terms of groups and friendships and your career aspirations, for example, that might stimulate you to make some plans around those areas. But all in all, I feel that the Gemini risings are, are getting a fairly easy month compared to some of the other signs.
It's quite an interesting mix of energy because, of course, Gemini rising, it's not quite your season yet. We've got the sun highlighting the 12th house. So if you need to, you can take a little bit of time for a treat yourself if you need to. But as she was saying, we've got so much activity in the social realms, particularly in the 11th house, that you might find you're torn if you do need a little bit of a rest. Of course, we've got your chart ruler going through the whole sign, 11th house. So as she was saying, you might have so many community events happening. You might be, even as Saturn dips its toes into Aries, on the positive end, if you enjoy being heads of committees or say you're part of the HOA in your local community, this might be a time where you take on maybe some responsibility in some sort of community or organizing event. On the positive end of that, I was trying to think. I had something
Sure.
else in my mind. Sorry, go ahead, Shu.
Well, as you were saying about the committee stuff, it could be the situation where you're frustrated by the lack of progress of a current, you know, organization or group leader that makes you kind of want to take things into your own control and just get the job done. So it could be, like Saturn is bringing some frustrations and delays to whatever house it's going to, but being in the sign of Aries, it's that frustration that really gives you that impetus to get things done, probably resentfully, but at the end of the day, it's about getting things done. And I just wanted to add as well, I love that advice that you gave about just being really mindful with our words this month. And for Gemini risings, by the middle of the month or whenever Mercury moves into Taurus, this is going to be in your 12th house of your own self undoing. So this is where really that time that you really need to be careful with what you say, because you could literally be shooting yourself in your own foot by yeah, undoing yourself with your words or with your thoughts and communication in general. So all the more like to really retreat and double think of what you're saying this month.
Such important advice, because for you, Gemini Rising, yes, at the beginning of the month, we've got some of these planets here, but as we get deeper into the month, we're going to have the sun transiting through the first house. We're going to have Mercury in there as well. So some of the things that you might have said might put you in the spotlight as the sun highlights you, and Mercury as well as you come into your first house. Another thing I'd mention as well, I mean, Jupiter, still toggling along there, but if you've got later degrees of Gemini Rising, might be quite nice with that Jupiter. But on the other flip side, with Jupiter, because even though it's the greater benefic, it's not always positive. So if you're looking to start a diet at this time, that Jupiter might not be quite as helpful.
An air diet might work
And then there you
with
go.
Jupiter in air. Oh
Absolutely.
gosh.
Wonderful. Okay, into our Cancer rising friends. Shu, your thoughts.
Okay, well, I think Cancers, like, there's a lot of activity happening in your important cardinal angular houses, with all the activation in Aries, and that's going to fall very much in your career house, the house of your job, your company, your bosses. There's probably going to be tensions and frustrations being felt there this month, and all of the interrelational ramifications of that, which could leave you a little bit drained and frustrated and possibly angry. So I would say this month, just keep that in mind, that there could be extra pressures around the work and career situation that might be making you feel a little bit dejected, or not quite yourself this month. And maybe some time out would be really helpful. Um, Especially, when it comes to that full moon by the second week, that full moon is going to be happening in that fifth house for you. So that's a good opportunity to go out and do something for yourself that's fun, to take you away from the pressures of work, and have a cry if you need to. But it certainly is a big cauldron, a big pressure cooker situation happening in your external world, whether it's through your bosses, your authorities, maybe your parents, um, whatever it is. It's some big dramas could be unfolding, I feel, for the Cancer risings.
Great point, Shu. And tying on to the point you're making here, for you, Cancer Rising, there's so much activity on the top half of your chart. So whether that's career or public standing, whatever that might be, so if, as Shu is saying, if it's getting a bit too much, especially as we get deeper into May, where we have the Sun and Mercury going into your 12th, it might be a good time to, if you have that cry after the full moon and get some of that emotion out, maybe it might be a good time for a bit of a retreat, or to at least take a little bit of a break from maybe the pressures of work or all those themes that Shu has been talking about. Because not only that, we're going to have Saturn dipping its toes into the whole sign 10th house. I'm sorry, again, did you mention that, Shu? I'm losing my mind here.
Uh, well, yeah, it's I
Yeah.
guess that's the all everything going into the 10th
Yeah.
house for Cancers this month, the whole kit and caboodle. And that just being a bit of a pressure cooker situation there.
Mm.
But there's a lot of opportunities that could come from that. We've got that nice Venus, Moon, Jupiter translation of light sort of happening between the 10th and 12th houses for you. And so that could bring some, nice ways of like learning how to escape from these pressures of work. Like maybe that might inspire you towards some new opportunities or new directions. That might be the trigger point for you to actually make these changes that you've been wanting to make. Sometimes we do need difficult situations to really push us towards that, taking that next step. So maybe this could be that potential for you.
Point. And as Shu said at the beginning of the video, making the really important point of the tail end of the Mars Pluto opposition. Well, for you, this is going to fall in the axis of the second, eighth house. So just being mindful at the beginning of the month, maybe some themes that pop out of those particular areas of life. So just something to keep in mind as that Mars starts to transit through your second house.
Yes, that lingering pressure of finances that's, I guess, feeding into the pressures of work. But yeah, it is still lingering, but I think there are some good opportunities that could come of it if you can see beyond just the immediate drama.
Wonderful points. Okay, into our Leo rising friends. Shu, your thoughts?
Okay, Leo rising friends, at one level, you will be glad that this whole Mars Pluto opposition is sort of over in a tangible way. At the same time, it's still bringing up these background underlying tensions within your personal relationships that might still be causing you a bit of grief. But in any case, I feel that the pressure is easing there in that regard. So that's something to look forward to, and just to remember that that the key lesson in all of this has been about power, the theme of power. Um, how do you actually, who do you want to have control of? Is it yourself or other people? You know, do you understand the impact that your behaviors have on other people? And, how do you empower others as well as yourself? So all of these dynamics, which is very much the core basis of interpersonal relationships, it's about that balance of power. And this has been a big um, lesson for you since November, and it's kind of come to the end. But I think the task now is to process and churn all of that, and to get it into a new way of being. That these changes that we make, that they don't just happen when a transit ends, or they don't happen when overnight. But these transits happen that present us with the issue, and then we now are in that process of integration. So think about, yeah, your personal relationships and how that's been for you, and how you can integrate some changes within that, as hard as it may be.
Wonderful points, you. And I think the key sentence there is that balance of power. Such wonderful points there for Leo Rising. And for you, Leo Rising, if you look at your charts with the transiting planets, the preponderance of planets, we're all above the horizon here. So this is, I think, going to be a very active time for you, certainly as your chart ruler is moving through your 10th house. So it's highlighting the areas of career, public standing, all of those key themes. And then it dips into Gemini. So it's going to be highlighting your whole sign 11th house. So as we get later into the month, you might be connecting with friendship groups. You might be doing a lot of socializing. This might be a great time for you. That you might let us know in the comments below. You might have felt that shift with Mars coming back into your first house, whether you found another rush of energy, particularly as that Mars transits your first house. As I always say, just be careful if your early degrees of Leo rising, and actually even up until 21 degrees of Leo for the month of May. The flip side of that Mars can be unexpected, not always, but just be mindful in the kitchen with sharp objects and things of that nature with that Mars. Of course, you need more confirmations than one transiting planet, but it's always something to keep an eye out for. But it also might give you that rush of energy to bring some vitality back for you. And I think for all my Leo rising friends, they seem to enjoy more of the spring and the summer months as these times come around. So a very social period for you. I think that Venus is going to be nice as it transits the ninth house. So if you want to take a bit of a pleasure trip, this might be a good time to do so. You can have that Venus in connection with your ascendant, whatever your ascendant degree is. And then you're finally going to have that Saturn that pulls its way out of the eighth house and goes into your ninth. So for maybe a positive end of that Saturn, if you're really thinking about, maybe you're thinking about going back to study in higher education, maybe you're thinking about an advanced degree, or maybe studying astrology and maybe taking that discipline to learn a new practice. On the flip side, if you are in elements of education, just the other side of that malefic Saturn might show itself. But it's going to be finally out of your whole sign eighth house, because I know for some of my Leo rising friends, they've had a horrid time in terms of shared resources with partners, and with a friend of mine tried to borrow from banks and was told no. It's a time,
Mm.
but that's not for everyone. This is just a generalized conversation about the transit. So that Saturn is going to finally move out of there into your ninth house.
Yeah, there's nothing you can hide this month, I think, with everything on the top of the chart, like you said. And so basically, changes that you're implementing, it's kind of put your money where your mouth is. It's time for action and nothing to hide. So be truthful, which is very much a ninth house thing, as well as the fact that it is about learning and higher wisdom. It's about truth. So connecting with who you are as a person, the truthfulness of yourself, and enacting that in your life publicly.
Absolutely. There's certainly no hiding for you, Leo Rising. Of course, it depends on what's going on in your natal chart, but in general, for Leo Rising as a rising fire sign, I think on the whole, many of you will enjoy a lot of these planets going into the fire air mix into your
Mm-hmm,
chart, which is a little bit more harmonious. But of course, it depends on your individual chart as well.
mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay, into our Virgo Rising friends. Shu, your thoughts?
Okay, so like I think the mutables this month, which are, Virgos, Pisces, Gemini, Sagittarius, they're getting less pressure, I feel. There's less sort of angular activity happening in their neck of the woods, which is a good thing. You can have a little breather. But I would say that the pertinent topics for you this month will be around your support systems and how you resource yourself, like your shared finances, loans, um, um, partners' income, like how you split things up, all of those entanglements, whether it's financial or emotional, will be coming into play this month. It could come as a bit of a rude shock as well, as maybe changes might be happening in your environment that force you to reassess your financial situations. And just keep in mind, I'm speaking of Saturn moving into your eighth house, that this is only for the next few months until September. But it's a good time to highlight what needs to be looked after, what loose ends needs to be addressed before Saturn moves permanently into your eighth house in February. So use this as a bit of a window to see what the potential frustrations or challenges might be, so that you can adequately prepare, because there's a lot of things going through that financial house. And of course, it doesn't always need to be finances. The eighth house is also anything to do with like lifetime planning kind of things, like your wills and inheritances, or maybe it's to do with your taxes and like all your superannuation, your paperwork kind of stuff. I find all that stuff really boring, so I call it my boring house. And those kind of questions that you ask out yourself is based on like, well, I've got this much time left on this earth. What am I going to do? Am I prepared? So these are the topics connected to the eighth house, which could also tie in the topics of the occult and other worlds, that might be really lively for you this month as well. So these are the themes that are really being activated for you this month, I feel.
Yeah, wonderful point, Shu. And I think for you, Virgo Rising, just highlighting what Shu has been saying, so much activity in the whole sign eighth house. So highlighting all those themes that Shu has been talking about, whether that's shared resources, shared finances, it could be taxes. So whether this is shared resources with, Saturn being a malefic and in its fall, maybe there might be some dynamic in terms of shared resources where maybe yourself or the partner is maybe something to iron out. So as she was saying, just being prepared as that Saturn dips its toes, at least for a couple of months, and comes back out. But I know this is quite a general statement, and obviously it's not going to speak to every Virgo rising, but the Virgo risings I do know tend to be quite discerning. So I think the advantage for you is that you can use that chart ruler, that Mercury, to really to plan ahead and to write down the notes and the things you need to get done. I think is going to be helpful for you, Virgo rising. We could also tie that Saturn, it rules the sixth house. I know a couple of my Virgo rising friends, particularly with that Pluto in the picture for a longer time period. Especially if you're maybe getting older in years, just be in the background thinking about issues of health and exercise, things that you do in your day-to-day routine. I think is something maybe to keep in the back of your mind, maybe things that you might have to switch up as you move through the next couple of years. But really for this month, I mean, we've got the sun highlighting the ninth house. This might be a good time. This might be highlighting, overseas travel, whatever that might be. It could be higher study. It could be involved in astrology or higher education. That sun's going to make a nice connection to that ascendant as well. So if you want to enjoy yourself, whether that is a bit of a pleasure trip, I think that'll be might be a nice time too. And I think as well, yeah, just to make that point, we've got the South Node that's going to be spending a bit of time through that first house as well. So that's just my only word of caution, is maybe to have maybe some of that health component in the back of your mind for the next couple of years.
Yeah, true. And I'm also thinking that there's going to be that new moon followed by that Mercury Cazimi happening at the end of the month, and that new moon is going to be in your 10th house of career. And so that idea, as you're contemplating finances, that there could be some, I guess, new visions or new ideas around what you want to do in that sort of career sector or with the companies that you're working for, etc. Given that also the eighth house is the 11th house from the house of your career. So it's what you want to gain from your career. What are your hopes and aspirations for your career is really being highlighted at the end of the month.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Fantastic points. Okay, into our Libra rising. Friends, Shu, your thoughts.
Okay, Libra rising. Well, all of the activity is happening in your seventh house. Saturn is moving into Aries. Venus is making that first conjunction with Neptune there. So really, this is all around feeling these big changes that are happening in the world and how that's actually resulting in your interpersonal relationships and the people around you. There could be some tensions and dramas and maybe miscommunication or some blurred ideas between you and a partner that could be causing lots of frustration or delays with things. But, it is an opportunity to be able to firm up some boundaries, like that discussion about boundaries in relationships is going to be a big topic for you, given that Neptune is in there, which has no boundaries, and Saturn is in there, which is all about boundaries. So it's about, as you do so well, finding that balance in relationships around the topics of give and take, which will be really pertinent for you this month, I feel. What are your thoughts, Callum?
Absolutely, sure. And as a Libra rising, you are on point with all of the points you're making, because for us, Libra rising, if you look at the chart, just the preponderance of planets, we're all on the western side here. So we're all dealing with others. We're not in the first quadrant or the fourth quadrant. We're not dealing with our own personal stuff. It's literally everybody else that we have to, as Shu was saying, find that balance, particularly with the seventh house being highlighted with partnerships. Now, this could be significant partnerships, romantic, could also be one-on-one business relationships that you might have. We might also tie the themes of open enemies, all these different themes that can come from the seventh house that might be highlighted during this time. And as Shu has been saying, not only have we got Neptune dipping its toes into the whole sign seventh house, we're going to have Saturn dipping its toes in there as well. So really two interesting planets to have in our opposition to our ascendant. So again, it might speak to different people. So I would say if you're free and single, that Neptune might be quite interesting for a larger period of time. So on the positive end, you might have someone who comes into your life that you just idolize, or it's kind of like the butterfly effect when someone comes in. But with Neptune, you've always got to be careful about who's coming to your life because you're not always going to be who they seem. So we've got to be careful with that in terms of a longer picture. Now we mix that in with Saturn. That's dipping its toes in there. If you are in a marriage or a partnership, there might be, it's a malefic. We're in the sign of its fall. We might be having some issues there in terms of, how are we communicating with that partner? We've got Mercury in there as well. What issues do we have to iron out in those partnerships? So it's all of these themes are speaking to significant others. Now, if you're free and single, this might not be as pertinent at the moment. It just might be people might be coming into your life at this time, and it's a bit of a crossroad because I'm quite happy for that Saturn to get out the sixth house after the last long period. So, like me, I know some of you Libra Risings have commented down below that some of us have started new health regimes, which I've done, trying to cut out a lot of the crap out of my diet, which I've had some successes with. Sometimes we lapse, but what can you do? So I'm quite happy for that Saturn to move on. But again, all that Saturn is going to do, particularly if you're a night chart like myself, is something to watch out for as it dips its toes in for the next couple of months. On a lighter note, we've had that Jupiter in our ninth house for a while. So if you're involved in higher education, higher study, astrology even, it's been making nice connections with our ascendant or any planets that we might have in the fifth house. So that's been quite a lighter feel for us. Now Mars is finally out of Cancer, thank God. It feels like it was being in Cancer for such a long time. As it's gone and gained some dignity going through our 11th house, maybe this is a good time and a good season to reconnect with friendship groups. We might be doing a lot of socializing at this time. Now, Mars is still a malefic, so might there be some conflict in community events? Maybe we're not seeing eye to eye with different people. And of course, we've got so much going on in the seventh house anyway. All we're doing here through these next couple of weeks is dealing with others. So if we need to take time out to retreat, definitely take advantage of that because we've got a lot of people to deal with, I feel, for a while.
Yeah, and I think the whole other principle with your chart ruler being in the seventh, like in the other sign, maybe the lesson there is like really learning to put yourself in other people's shoes and to see a different perspective of something that might be outside of your comfort zone and something that you're not used to, but that's all really great intel for you to be able to then build back into your boundary making and your ideals about the relationships. Like, are they realistic, or am I looking through the lens in my rose-colored glasses kind of situation? So and Saturn moving through the seventh, it doesn't always need to be a challenging thing. I think what it is, it's a very stabilizing long-term perspective that you're bringing into relationships. You're looking at how do I prolong or to make this relationship get better with age, like a good wine. So if you can keep that in mind, it can be a very productive time for enduring relationships, the longevity of relationships.
I love that point, Shu, because again, that side of Saturn, you find a lot of people who make commitments as Saturn transits through the seventh house. So that could be an element as well. Maybe people get engaged, getting married, that long-term commitment type of deal. So I really like that point. And of course, as the Sun transits and Mercury eventually gets into our ninth house, it's going to bring a bit of air and a bit of perspective. So that's going to be quite more of, I wouldn't say light-hearted, but certainly bring a bit more air into the chart as we get deeper into the month. Absolutely wonderful.
Which is what every Libra needs, is a bit more air.
That's right. Exactly right. Wonderful. Okay, into our Scorpio rising. Friends, Shu, your thoughts.
Right. Well, big full moon happening in your neck of the woods. So that's in the middle of the month and something to really watch out for. There could be lots of huge insights coming to you about who you are as a person, what you want to do, maybe some insights around your health and well-being, like what is actually working for you or what's actually bringing you down, because these are the things that might need to be addressed. You might need to challenge yourself to let go of a few things, let go of some control and power. no matter how difficult it is, if there's the overbalance of that control and power causing you, say, depression or difficulties with anxiety, for example. So this full moon is also, like we said in the introduction, bringing in that whole Mars-Pluto opposition that's been highlighted since November last year. So at one end, you're coming through a big battle already, and trying to process a lot of the lessons learnt from the big themes of power and control that you've witnessed since November. So this is a really big full moon happening for you, especially as well. We've got that Pluto making a station retrograde right at the bottom of your chart in your fourth house. This is often a very deep and private area of the chart. So there could be some, potentially some dark times this month, or dark moments this month, where you're really connecting with that shadow and giving some light to the forgotten aspects of yourself, that the aspects of yourself that you want to run away from. And in a way, there's no real running away from it this month, but the strength that you can get from that will be super amazing. So it's going to be certainly watery and emotional. Watch your emotional reactions to things, because that could flare things up. It would be really good for you to kind of hide out a little bit. You've got a lot of stuff in the sixth house, which is that house that kind of shows where you don't have much control over things. And maybe that's what you need to cut off what you can't control, and just focus on things that you can control, for your own mental health and well-being. So yeah, a bit of work this month, but I think it's well worth it.
Yeah, wonderful point, Shu. And I like what you were saying at the beginning of the video, and which you've touched on there, is the tail end of that Mars-Pluto opposition. And for you, it's even more significant, Scorpio Rising, with that Mars being your chart ruler and reinforced by being in angular houses. So we've got the fourth, 10th house axis. So keeping in mind of any themes that pop up from maybe areas of work and career, home and family life, maybe some strain or some tension there, keeping an eye out for those different themes, because it's quite interesting for you, Scorpio Rising. Even though Mars gains some dignity as it gets into fixed fire, gets into Leo, and it goes out of the fall, it's quite interesting for you, Scorpio Rising, because the position of where that Mars is in the chart actually goes into the angular house, which kind of squares off from the ascendant. So for you, a bit of a mixed bag. So you might have a bit of more of a rush of energy being your chart ruler, but because of the position in the chart, it might be, as Shu was saying before, there might be elements of tension or angst. So just being mindful, if you can take a bit of a break, I would certainly advise you to do, especially as Shu is saying with that packed sixth house. It's going to be a time, certainly with Saturn over the next couple of years. I mean, Saturn now is only going to dip its toes into the whole sign sixth house, but you're going to have to be mindful of all those topics. So whether that's your routines, maybe it's health routines, maybe you're going to have to think about how you, again, it might be just health issues in terms of restructuring how you live your day-to-day life. So if you, for example, have an office job where you're sitting around a lot, it's going to be a larger theme over the next couple of years in order to restructure maybe your working life and how maybe you work on health elements, maybe developing a new gym routine, all those kind of themes, as that Neptune's going to be there for a long time as well. And for
Yeah.
you, Scorpio Rising, again, we've got, preponderance of planets on the western half of the chart. So we're not really dealing with, you are dealing with your own inner works, as Shu has pointed out with the full moon in Scorpio, but the preponderance of these transiting planets are happening where the relationship sector is. So whether that's the second quadrant of others in your immediate environment, co-workers, whether that's personal relationships, you're dealing a lot with other people at this time and for quite a long period of time for you.
Yeah, totally. And I think, look, if everyone can keep their egos in check this month for Scorpio risings, especially in that work area, there could be some really great new working dynamics that come about all of this. But that's as long as people can, I guess, yeah, be a bit humble, and yeah, just keep that ego under control. I think that's where the gold could be this month. That there could be just some satisfaction in like being able to manage conflict and power, not by controlling others, but by controlling yourself.
Wonderful point. Absolutely. I think for you, Scorpio Rising, when we do our next month's forecast, you'd be quite happy for that Jupiter to be exalted, going through the ninth and ruling the fifth. And I think that's going to be a different time. Anyway, that's for the next month, so I won't ramble on. Here we go. Okay, into our Sagittarius Rising friends. Shu, your thoughts.
Sagittarius, okay. Another mutable sign. So not much happening at the angles. You've still got that lovely Jupiter there in the seventh house, which has been there for a little while. Make the most of that because it's about to change signs in a couple of months' time and move into your eighth house. But for the meantime, with Jupiter in the seventh and Venus in the fifth, this could be a really great month for, just enjoying yourself in relationships and doing fun things together and sharing moments that are really special with a significant other or just with any kind of one-on-one relationships, or maybe in a work context, like if it's to do with business partners, like really great time to be doing something that's really creatively inspiring for the partnership, that can really bring about some new opportunities for the partnership together. We do have Neptune already in the fifth, which we've had for the last couple of weeks, and that's certainly adding to the inspiration and looking at the possibilities of what dreams could be made of. But then Saturn, that's coming in later this month into your fifth, will hopefully not put a wet blanket too much on these dreams, but rather to bring about some real tangible action plans that can result, and to not lead you on the garden path too much that you're wasting time with unfruitful matters. But Saturn's role there is to kind of pull you back into something that's going to be more worthwhile for you in the long run. So yeah, what do you think about Sag?
Wonderful, wonderful advice, you. And I like what you're talking about with that Jupiter. We're transiting the seventh house still. So highlighting, of course, your chart ruler as well, highlighting the area of significant relationships. Now, it's also ruling your fourth house. So this might be times where you may be just having a nice time with a partner at home. Because I think what's kind of nice for you, Sagittarius Rising, is you're going to finally have that greater malefic move out of the fourth angular house for you. So that might be a sense of if something in the home life is being quite heavy, maybe this is a time as Saturn dips its toes into Aries, maybe some of that heaviness might lift in that area of life. Now, of course, Saturn, yes, it goes into its fall in the fifth house, but in the connection to a fire rising sign, I like these planets moving into the fire signs because they have a nicer connection throughout the chart. So, of course, Saturn is going to go back and dip its toes back in the fourth, so you might have to wrap things up later in the year. But eventually, that Saturn, if it's been cumbersome in that area of life in the fourth house, you might have again that sense of heaviness might leave as that Saturn eventually moves on. What else have I been thinking? I was going to say something else for Sagittarius Rising. Yeah, I like that Mars going through the ninth, but yes, it might be a malefic. But if you're looking for, overseas sport adventures or so, ruling the fifth house, overseas sport adventures, or doing something that takes energy with you, Sagittarius Rising, if you like to explore, this might be a great time to do that. With Mars, yeah, it's not always smooth sailing, but I do like that it has some dignity and it's got out of that hidden house of the eighth. So this might be a good time with that packed fifth house. Maybe a good time for any creative outlet, any sports that you might do. If this is involved with traveling and you like to broaden your horizons, this is going to be coming up some great times to do all of those different things.
Yeah, what I really like about that Mars is that by the 22nd of May, it's going to make that trine to Venus, which will be trine to the first house for all the risings as well. So that's a really, like you said, creative and inspiring combination of planets where you can take action behind some of your deepest desires that are truly meaningful, that have like true significance and meaning for your life, as well as just your, just from that physical soul level as well,
I love that. I think
spiritual soul level.
absolutely, absolutely. I think my only word of caution might be for some of you is that Saturn, as it does go into its fall in the fifth house by sign, because Saturn rules that second house, by sign, they square off. So as long as you've got the funds to do the things you want to do, keep that in mind.
Yeah, and maybe not too many candles, just in case.
Absolutely. Great advice. Okay, into our Capricorn rising friends. Shu, your thoughts?
Yeah, well, Capricorn Rising, our friends there are going to have it all happening in the very private area of their chart, whether it's their inner home life or their private thoughts. So lots of internal churning and processing, maybe feeling a lot of confusion and frustration at a deep inner level that is kind of making you feel a little bit like the ground is shifting from underneath you, like that you're feeling the vulnerability of instability of all these changes. So that could be a really real thing this month. And there could be some maybe potential projections of all of these pressures out on relationships there, especially when Venus starts to make its first connections there with these outer planets in that fourth house for you. So just be a little bit mindful of that. That there is this kind of below the surface seethingness, and maybe part of that is to retreat, like stop consuming too much out there in the world that's going to bring you down and cause you more pressures, because it is a very disorientating time that you might be going through right now with Neptune there. And by feeding into it with more like news and media and stuff, it can be quite overwhelming. So I would suggest to stay low, maybe get a bit more rest, get some more sleep, do some self-care, tend to the garden, um, quietly sort of potter around at home rather than doing too much out there in the world or consuming too much out there in the world.
Yeah, I think that's wonderful advice for Capricorn rising. For a time now, if you look at your charts and the transiting planets, as she was saying, this is a really private time. We've got a preponderance of planets below the horizon. Of course, we've got your chart ruler Saturn. It's going to be moving into its fall. Kind of tricky for Capricorn rising as it moves into an angular house, traditionally not in great shape in Aries, and eventually it'll be squaring off on that ascendant. So being mindful of that, as Shu has been saying, maybe some of that seething tension. It might be the areas of home life that start to manifest in some of those stressful times or those tensions. Not always. There's always, positive and negatives out of everything. But I certainly agree with Shu in terms of, just being mindful and just trying to take the pressure off yourself. I think for you, Capricorn rising, not so much in May. I think as we get maybe more into June, things will start to feel a little bit nicer. We're going to have that Jupiter exalted in the seventh house, which I think is going to be quite nice. It's angular for your chart in the seventh house. Venus will be making its way into the pleasurable fifth house, making nice connections to the ascendant. So I would say for this month, just get through the nitty gritty, get things that you need to get done. And I think you will be have a bit of a let off as we get deeper in, especially as we get into next month. It might be a little bit of an easier time. But again, not all doom and gloom. It's how you work with these energies. And of course,
Yeah.
these are just transits. This doesn't speak to every Capricorn rising. Of course, there's so many different charts that we can look at. But
Yeah.
I would certainly
Yeah.
say, yeah. Sorry,
I, I
Shu, go
think
ahead.
I think what makes it difficult maybe for Capricorn risings this month is because as an archetype, Capricorns are used to being really capable out there in the world, doing their job, managing things, really productive. And there's not actually a lot of time and energy put towards emotional well-being or self-care or asking for help. But I think what this month is doing is it's giving you that opportunity um, to recreate all of your successes, but maybe internally at the home front. Create some dreams at home. Like the ambitions don't always need to be external. They can be with family, with your inner life, like some new structures to take time out or to maybe outsource some things and that, even though is easy for a lot of people, is actually really hard for a Capricorn to do, like to get someone to do the job for you. So that in that way, that's what's making it tricky, because you're stepping outside of your comfort zone this month with these kinds of, challenges. A good challenge to have, I must add, but doesn't make it any easier for someone that's so Capricorn risings that are so in control of their whole own lives all the time.
It's such a great point, Shu, because I have a Capricorn rising friend, and he is quite a public figure, and he's been struggling, and not just for the last couple of weeks, for a while now, but trying to say to him, there's so much activity going on in the private life and things that you have to tie up. So trying to be visible in public and to strive, and a lot of Capricorn risings I know are very hard workers, but he's not quite seeing the success that he used to previously. So, if you are a public figure, you're trying to push in to that area of life. Of course, we've got the South Node, draining the top half of the chart as well. So again, what Shu is saying is, I think, just to reiterate, is tie up some of those loose ends, go back and reassess what worked in the past, and think about how you can move forward in the future to return to those places that you'd been before. And again, we all go through, difficult times in our lives, and some of the transits show that, but you always put in the hard work and the effort, and eventually, a Saturn ruled chart, as you already know, you put in the hard work, you'll eventually get those results back.
Yes, and this is your foundation. Like, it might seem unproductive, but nobody ever comes into a house and go, great footings, like great concrete slab. But it's so
Absolutely.
necessary for the viability of the house.
Absolutely. Wonderful points. Okay, into our Aquarius rising friends. Shu, your thoughts?
Okay, Aquarius risings, there's this lingering power control issue that's been happening in the area of relationships and yourself for quite some time, since November, and it's coming to a head. And this month will be about processing all of that, and that issue has been about maybe at some level self-advocacy, like standing up to reclaim some power from yourself, with Pluto moving into the first. Having been in Capricorn for all these years prior to this last year, that power has somewhat been on the back burner or being lost, and now that Pluto is in Aquarius, you're kind of wanting to get your life back together again and to reclaim some of the power and control that you want over your life. But that has probably been in conflict with what other people are used to you doing, like being the doormat or being the one that's, putting your own power aside for the good of everyone else. And so that's that conflict that I see with that Mars Pluto opposition. As people are starting to realize now who you are, this new butterfly that's emerging into the world, there can be some tensions with that. And that's definitely been the story for this year so far. And it continues in a more internal sense now. So it's maybe around you treading a bit more cautiously and sensitively around how you use that power. Like, just because you've got this power now, it doesn't mean you abuse it, that you're still respectful to other people. And with all of those planets moving in the third house, it's actually working on that level of your mindset and your ideas about how you want to move around in this world. So how are you going to use that power for good or for bad, in this world? There's a bit of confusion with where you might be standing, how you're interacting with those around you. Certainly the instability has been impacting your day-to-day life. But so this month is actually kind of, in a way, retraining yourself a little bit about how you can, what does your life and day to day actually involve now with these new changes? I think there's a lot of new structures that need to be put in place, some accountability that needs to come in there as well. But also balancing that with, what does this new life mean for you, and what are your desires? So yeah, that's what I think for the Aquarius risings.
Yeah, wonderful point, Shu. And I like what you said when we talked about Leo rising before. And it kind of fits in for Aquarius rising, is that balance of power theme that you talked about before. So with Shu talking at the beginning of the video of the tail end of the Mars Pluto opposition, here it's quite significant because we're in angular houses with the first house, seventh house. So have there been any power dynamics in terms of yourself versus relationships? Now that Mars is ruling the 10th house, has this been a power dynamic connected to maybe work life or dealing with authority figures where maybe you have a particular view that might not match other people? And how ultimately, with that heavy third house, are you going to communicate those themes if there are elements of not outright conflict, but maybe some tension in terms of, okay, what am I doing here? Is my bosses, are they going down the right lane, or how do I challenge this but in a diplomatic way? I think those are going to be some of the themes. With a heavy third house, we're going to have your chart ruler move into the third house. So for example, if you are a teacher or you're dealing with a lot of communication roles, there could be, on the flip side, on the malefic side of this, maybe some tension or some disagreements in the way you're communicating with others. There could be the themes around that third house. And yeah, just being mindful of maybe some of those tensions. So again, it can manifest in many different areas of life. It could be
Mm.
one-on-one partners. It could be the Mars rule in the 10th with career factors. It could be all things to do with the third house of communication. But I like what you're saying, Shu, because all those themes start to resonate. And this really is a private time, Aquarius rising. Not that you can't do plenty of things publicly, but there's a lot going on under the surface here, below the horizon, where you've got to tie up all of these ends and move forward.
Yeah. And so, and on that point with, the whole Mercury and being careful with the words this month,
Mhm.
maybe with Mercury at the bottom of your chart over this May could be that, yeah, keep your words to yourself. Like maybe you don't need to say everything for this month. Like maybe there are some times that you can, bottle things up for a later date. And it kind of seems like this is one of those months for Aquarius risings.
Absolutely. Wonderful point. Okay, last but certainly not least, into our Pisces rising friends. So, Shu, your thoughts.
Okay, Pisces rising. Well, you'll be glad that you're going to experience life without Saturn going through your first house for a few months, which is good and bad. I think for a lot of Pisceans, as difficult it has been, Saturn has really tidied a lot of things up for you, and to get your stuff together and organize yourself and tie up a lot of loose ends that you've been maybe struggling to do for many years. So I think there's a lot to thank Saturn for as it finalizes its first house encounter for you. And now you can move on to focusing on other things in your life, like such as maybe your job or your livelihood, and maybe focus that attention on like what you want to do to actually earn your money. Because maybe the first house when Saturn was there, you might have had to just do a job that you didn't like too much for the sake of discipline, for the sake of getting your life in order again. being that Saturn in the first is actually the 12th house from the second house of income and the way you earn money. So Saturn in the first is essentially sabotaging your livelihood in some way. So in that way, you might have been sabotaging yourself through like having to work in a job that you really didn't want to work in. But maybe, just maybe, with Neptune in that second house and Saturn moving into that second house, it's about recreating a dream of how you want to earn money and support yourself. Venus being there certainly brings in that desire element this month for you. So that's one, I think, good thing that could come out of this month. Um, that could be brought about, through difficulties and delays as well, obviously, with the Saturn is a malefic going into a difficult sign, but that might be the trigger for you to make these changes that you need to make. And you have time to make them, for the next couple of years. This will be a project area for you. But certainly, yeah, it's a time in which finances, more conscious financial decisions could be begun this month for you.
Such beautiful advice, you, for Pisces Rising. And just tying into what you're saying with, I think I'm so happy for you, Pisces Rising, that Saturn is finally going to be moving out of your whole sign first house. It might be a sense of that heaviness just lifting a little bit. Because what I've found with, Saturn particularly transiting the first house, sometimes it can beget a lack of confidence. So recently, for a time with that Saturn being there for so long, if you've lacked that bit of confidence, then this may be a time where you've worked on yourself, maybe worked on that confidence, and maybe start to feel more of yourself again as that Saturn. Yes, it goes into the fall, into the second house, and those issues, as Shu's been saying, is something you're going to have to think about. And of course, Saturn will come back a little bit, but eventually move out full time from your first house. But I think it's just going to be a nice shift to have that Saturn move on, particularly as we get to the end of the year. What I do like for you as well, Pisces Rising, as of course we've had your chart ruler in Gemini for a while and its detriment. I think particularly as not so much for May, but we can talk about this next month, is that Jupiter gets wonderfully exalted in Cancer, starts moving through your fifth house next month. I think that's going to be such a more joyous time in terms of your area of pleasure, creativity, the connection it will make to your ascendant, and the ruler of your 10th house. I think there's some really good opportunities, but we'll probably talk more about that as we get into June. And but I really like for you, Pisces Rising. I feel like I've got a few Pisces Rising friends, and some of them have had a rough go of it. And I feel like for you, Pisces Rising, some of that is finally going to bugger off and leave you feeling a little bit lighter as we get into the next couple of months.
Literally, the lead foot kind of situation has been gone. And it's interesting that Saturn moving through that first house of any sign can often bring difficulties with injuries, especially like, that literally like lead foot, walking around with a limp. And so I'm wondering whether, if you've had some structural health issues, like maybe it could be something to do with your feet or like a broken ankle or something like that, that maybe Saturn moving out of it could be a sign, could be an opportunity for that healing to have occurred and to move on from that.
That's such a great point about the health component, because of course we're going to have Mars there transiting the sixth house whole sign for a time. So maybe having to rework some of your routines. Maybe it might be a good time to rework maybe a gym regime, or if you don't like the gym, maybe something a bit different just to rework what you're doing. Because Mars can sometimes I'm not a medical astrologer, so certainly don't take my advice, but sometimes can be inflammation, things like that, that might just spark up for a couple of days and stuff like that. So being mindful about the health component. But that Saturn has been there for a long time, so might have been a longer play for you, Pisces Rising.
Totally.
Wonderful. Well, Shu, as always, thank you so much for not only going through the first couple of weeks of a very interesting May, but also all of the rising signs. Now, what's going on with you? What's going on? What you're doing with Kepler? Other projects you're going on? What's going on?
Oh, there's actually so much going on right now. So firstly, I'm still teaching my solar returns course, and that's going to be open for booking soon. The course will start in July. We are about to launch a new medieval certificate with KeplerCollege, which will be amazing. It will be the astrology from like the Persian Arabic kind of era through to the later medieval period in the West. And we have an amazing team lined up. So Ona Dosa, Ehsan Kazeni, and Anthony Lewis, who's going to, and myself, who will be teaching all this fun stuff like primary directions, advanced perfections, lunar mansions, Arabic parts, world astrology, which is a great time to be learning these world astrology from the ancient Persian medieval techniques. And there's going to be a fantastic significators course coming up. Should be open for booking now. And that's how to actually look at the chart at each planet and see what it actually signifies, because there are more than one way to find a significator for, say, career. It's not just the 10th house ruler. There are all these other rules that come into play from the medieval period, like looking at the lots and looking at angles to the 10th house, etc. So lots of exciting things coming up for Kepler and the medieval certificate. I'm also going to be going to Istanbul at the end of May to do some teaching. I'll be teaching on Fidaria, as well as doing a longer workshop on the transits of inner planets, because we often look at transits of large planets, but often overlook, what does it mean when, say, Mercury transits over something in a chart. So I'll be teaching a workshop on that, as well as teaching a lecture on Fidaria. So lots of things happening. I guess I'll update everything up on my website as they come through. But in the meantime, check out Kepler's newly launched Significator course by Ona Dosa, and the soon to be launched medieval certificate stream for all of those that have that either have finished their fundamentals in Kepler or are just wanting to do electives, because there's some really cool electives coming up for this stream. Lots of really cool stuff, like using astrolabes, for example. That's something that we've got in the pipeline. And a Fidaria course, an advanced perfections course, etc. So yeah, stay
Absolutely
tuned.
amazing. I'm not going to swear on this stream, but I was going to be like, holy S, what an incredible lineup with all of those. It's Ona Dosa, you've got Anthony Lewis, yourself, and honestly, it's not just my Libra Rising. Whereas when I say your work, Shu, is brilliant, it's an understatement, because all the things you do, absolutely incredible. You're teaching so many classes, you're in so many different branches of astrology. So not only in 101, you've got advanced, you got the solar returns class and the medieval certificate coming on. So absolutely mind-blowing. So for everybody watching, as always, I'll leave the links in the description and comment boxes for all of the different things coming up, so you can find out all those information and sign up, all those different things. And yeah, absolutely wonderful. So as always, Shu, thank you so much. And you'll be joining us again for, let's see, May, June, July. Is it August we'll be back for?
Yeah, Leo season.
Leo season. Yeah. There we go.
August, yes.
We're going from smelling the roses to getting up on stage. So I look forward to that. That's great.
Yes, we'll look forward to that then.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you again next time. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.